I was contacted by RBC in at the end of last year, and they particularly President CEO Dave McKay and went out, and I think it appears that his legacy wants to leave is related to climate and sustainability and that whole area. He went out and he hired John Stackhouse from the Globe and Mail to be in charge of thought leadership, which is more than this, but sustainability and agriculture is right at the top. So they went and they worked with the Boston Consulting Group. They did a bunch of other things and they did a bunch of reports. So they came to me at the end of about the end of December or so and said, we're going to hold a series of meetings across the country, particularly the prairies in Ontario. Kim, would you moderate those sessions? So that's what I did. I really had nothing to do with their reports on any of what that goes. I should say I don't do much facilitating anymore, but I agreed to do this one. And why did I do that? First off, because I think this is a topic that we in agriculture have not necessarily taken as seriously as we should have. And I call this topic sustainability. Did I hit something? Okay. Sustainability in agriculture. That's the first thing. And the second reason is because it's RBC. And when you have McKay and Stackhouse, they can open doors that we didn't even know there were bloody rooms of. But I also find that they don't always get things correct. And my dad used to say, if you don't want to get kicked by a horse, you get close to it. So I said, okay, I will do these sessions. So we did sessions across the prairies, across Ontario. They were panel discussions. They brought in their own panels and they attracted pretty good crowds in that regard. And then we had dialogue with that and we opened it with the audience. But in addition to that, I went out and I had a whole bunch of talks with different people. I'd meet with you or this group or whatever, and I'd get input. So it comes about the 1st of May and I'm sitting down and I said to myself, what the hell did I learn? What did I observe? And I put some notes together and they're in 3 buckets. The first bucket is, this is what I learned and observed. The second bucket is, what do I think? And the third bucket is, there is some major commitments that have been made by corporations and governments, and they have a date called 2030 on them. That is 6 production seasons away from that. That is not very long. If I was in charge, what would I do? So I come up with 5 suggestions on what I would do to advance sustainability. Now I have my notes and you can't have them, okay? Because what I find is that you write a report and you read it and it goes, no, that was really good. So what I'm doing is saying, I will have a dialogue. So I met with you and you'd say, well, gee, that was kind of interesting. Would you meet with this? And it is amazing the number of requests that I have been getting to do that. And that's what happened here. You called about another thing. And what have you been doing, Kim? Well, I've been doing this. Well, gee, maybe we should have this session. So that's why we're here. Okay. Let's remember, this is my interpretations of things. So what I'm going to do is walk you through my 3 buckets. Are you fair? What did I learn and observe? And then let's have a discussion. Fair? My first observation was this topic, as I've said, called sustainability in agriculture, is the interest in this is high and it's growing. However, everybody is cautious as heck. A major observation is the next one. There is a wall. I call it the credibility and communications wall. And on one side of the wall, we have agriculture. And on the other side of the wall, we have politicians and academics and NGOs. And we both yell at the wall. And until this wall comes down and we have a degree of trust and communications, not much progress is going to happen. It's an observation. Every group I met with, I'd say, what does sustainability mean? This is a question that lacks a consistent answer. It's always, oh, it's about the environment, etc. but rarely is it economics, and definitely it is rarely about community and social. Another observation is the opportunity of sustainability needs to be clarified. Today, the majority of farmers and those in the agribusiness community don't fully appreciate the momentum that is behind some of these major market influencers to meet their global pledges and the investment and the commitment that they have made. Agriculture sees the costs and the challenges, but I'm not sure they're seeing the benefits and the opportunities. So an observation is a major education program is required to advance this. In addition to that, we need to know, where the hell are we going? What does success in agriculture look like? What is the vision that we have? And we need to be able to communicate this in simple terms so that people understand it and can get behind it. Communications is very important, and I'll get into that in more detail. Another observation, measurements, of course, are critically important, and they are not figured out. Measurement, MRVs, measurements, reporting, verification, must be a major focus area. And this requires input from vested stakeholders, the entire supply chain, including governments, and especially farmers. And no country has got this figured out yet. And this is an opportunity for Canada. Equally as important as the measurements, I think, is the verification system. And the verifications may be figured out a little better when we figure this is gold standards, etc. But it is expensive stuff, and it is, many cases, unpractical. We got to get that figured out as well. Again, I said Canada has an opportunity to take a leadership here, and we must do things that are aligned globally. And this whole topic of measurements and verifications are sensitive topics, and they must be handled with competency and with care. Data clarification. There's confusion on what type of data farmers and ranchers and supply chain partners should be collecting, and how can it best be stored, and how can it best be protected, and how can it easily be utilized to be able to do some of this. Data collection is important, but tell me what I should be tracking. Where's it going to be stored? Am I protected? How can I use it? Lots to do in that regard. Benchmarking, and reporting are equally as important and very sensitive. And choosing the right comparatives is really important. Boston Consulting Group did not get that right in some of the things, in my perspective. They were using comparatives that didn't make sense in a level of cases for various areas. Regionality is really important. There's significant differences between crops and soils and rainfall and best practices and outcomes in different parts of this country, and get ahead of that, get onto that in that regard. There's new information that's starting to come out all the time that makes Canada look pretty good. The new information that GIFS, the Global Institute of Food Security, has got, and they're about to publish once it gets the scientific documentation that comes behind it. That is good stuff that shows Canada doing a lot better than we thought it was going to be doing. You look at GWP versus GWP 100 on the methane reduction in the cattle industry, etc. We do really good. We got to start reporting the most current data is this country. Reporting is important. And so is our predictions that we made. Some of the predictions RBC made in their next Green Revolution report they don't make sense. Come on, get them in line with what we're trying to do. Predictions, reporting, and that is really important. The next comment or observation I had is I called the gold rush and the magic formula. We're all hunting for it, especially corporations. They recognize the financial potential and they're eager to get into the business, particularly the carbon credit business. It appears that the regulatory enforcement in this country for agriculture, I think, is maybe taking a little backseat on agriculture, not so much in the oil and gas industry, but the regulatory, the push that's coming from government. I think we've got a little bit of time in a few areas of that, and we can get into that a little later. But the supply chain people are coming on strong on where it is. And the majority of farmers are skeptical of, and most farmers are not in any hurry to sign up for these programs. The US is considerably further ahead than Canada, both governments and corporations. And there is no respected leader in place yet that says, I'm going to follow you. I trust you. I'm going to follow you, because that's where it is. There's nobody has really emerged here, I don't think, on that. We'll come back to that point in a few minutes. There's the Kansas project. Are you familiar with the Kansas projects? The Canadian Agriculture Net Zero Alliance, which is McCain's and Maple Leaf and Nutrien and the University of Saskatchewan and some of the others. Those, they got two major projects. One is a carbon project that is being done with Christian Hebert on his farm in Moosomin, Saskatchewan, southeast Saskatchewan. And there's another one on biodigesters that they're coming. And I think these are good projects to study. And I think that's something we should keep in contact with what they're doing. The best emission reduction programs that I've witnessed is Nutrients and the new RBC prototype that they're looking at on how they are going to reward for emissions. Just on programs like this. To date, all the focus, or the majority of the focus, has been on carbon and a little bit on emission reduction, but nature solutions like preserving grasslands, recognizing forest areas, etc., like that, those haven't been brought into the case where they are. When it comes to programs for farmers, recognition, reward programs, there are three absolutely pillars that any successful program must have. This is an important point, folks. It must be simple. In other words, I understand where we're going and I get it and I support it. It's simple. Number two, it must be easy. I am not going to fill out 100 bloody forms every year. So technology is going to play a very key role in making this happen. And number three, it must be profitable. If it is not profitable, if it is not simple, if it is not easy, all three of those, you're not going to have much sign up for insets, for outsets, or offsets, for any program. Simple, easy, profitable. Another observation, a Team Canadian approach, Team Canadian agricultural approach is essential. And farmers must be at the table, and they must be in a decision-making position, not sitting on the bench and watching. And farmers are beginning to recognize that they need to be more involved and speak with a united tongue. And I look forward to the day when that would happen, because we aren't very good as an industry at doing that, are we? By the same token, I think, and the Team Canadian approach needs to encompass the entire supply chain from farm to food. And in that regard, I think we could learn a lot from McDonald's. What McDonald's did with the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef is a very good template of bringing farmers and ranchers and industries and governments together. And we got something that is working there. There's harmony and they work together. I think that template is needed in sustainability. Just an aside on that, yesterday I had a very interesting meeting here. I was the global CEO of McDonald's was here in Edmonton. That's why I'm here, actually. And wherever he comes, he brought 3 of his international leadership team with him. And wherever he comes, Cargill's right behind him, right? So they were there, and we toured the paddy plant. And then I was asked to moderate a session. I brought 2 young leaders with me, and we provided our thoughts on some different things. And they were good. Those 2 young leaders knocked it out of the park, I'll tell you. And one of the key messages that we conveyed to them is, McDonald's, you play an important role. You are a link. We'd love your money, but we need more leadership from you on different things to help bring our industry together. We need more people like that to do that and where they can come. And I think that kind of leadership is needed, because we need to take on this area of sustainability in agriculture, a perspective that is a total Canadian, total supply chain. There's opportunities there. It's an observation. Another observation, communications is critical. Words matter. Tone and approach matters. Federal government learned that on the fertilizer issue. Common language matters. Let me give you a story. I'm in Saskatoon, and I'm doing another initiative for a friend. I just sort of was helping out. And I was meeting with, I think it was 10 or 11 good progressive farmers, a couple in the beef industry, most of them are in the crops industry. And I would say they were a little larger than average probably, and they were a little younger than average. That would be the group. So I used this opportunity to bounce a few words and phrases off. And I said, so what do you think about this sustainability thing? Oh, they straightened right up. And I said, what do you know about regenerative agriculture? Oh, they tightened up. You could just feel it. How important is soil health? Oh, soil health. Now that's really important. You know, the healthier the soil, the more productive it is, the more valuable it is. Oh yeah, soil health, that's important. And you know what? We could probably do a better job on that whole area than we're doing. So I sat back and I said to myself, those are 3 different terms. Those are 3 different phrases, but they're kind of all going in one direction, right? So I said, sustainability is a word like innovation or whatever. Like it isn't going away. Who uses the term regenerative agriculture? In Canada in particular, government, academics, and those that are preaching to the industry. And it doesn't go over very well at all. But it's different in the US. First off, what the pioneers of regenerative agriculture, it was manure, it was livestock, it was incorporating everything into it. Listen to what's coming out of the US these days. You never hear that. It's more sustainable, zero tillage, biodiversity, some things like that. Some stuff we've been doing for a long time. You can say different things in the US and you say different things in Canada. Communications is important. Words are important. Remember, we have a wall, a communications and credibility wall, and it's got to come down, and communications plays a really, really important role. And I think any communications on this topic would be enhanced if we started with this comment. You know what? This is a really complex topic and area, and it's a continually moving target. And sometimes policy has got ahead of practicality and reality. Just start there. Also, when it comes to communications, let's remember a few things. And policymakers don't always get this. In agriculture, we get 1 crop per year. 1 set of livestock a year, in general terms. And I just bought a new seed drill. And I spent hundreds of thousands. I'm not buying a new one tomorrow. We got to understand some of these things. We also understand that policy has been ideology-led rather than science-based in a lot of cases. And some of the unintended consequences are starting to bite our bum. EU's finding that out already on some of their things. Communications is important. I think from a Canadian perspective, we need to start reporting things different. We need to start reporting acres versus farms and animals versus producers. Why do I say that? Stats Canada says there's 165,000 farmers, right? According to Stats Canada. Really, the numbers that are doing the acres or the number of cattle, there's what, 15, 20,000 farms that represent the vast majority. You look at what they are doing compared to what we were reporting to do. Looking for, you fly across the country, look down, see how straight everything's going, what percentage of the acres are being managed by GPS, et cetera, like that. Yet look at the numbers of how we report it, and we are very low on number of people that are accepting technology. Let's do it by acres versus farms, versus animals versus producers. Let's report so we can win and have it the way it's coming from. Agriculture and communications, we know, you teach, you don't preach, and you encourage, you don't blame. Communications is important. We got to give that one a high priority. Maybe more important than communications is this: money matters. Show me the money. Farmers need to be able to see that there is dollars in preserving as well as producing. Canada is behind the US in incentives and support, both governments and corporates. The farmers, the programs, the farmers must get the majority of the rewards, not the aggregators and not the companies that are making their goals based on the back of a farmer. Money matters. And I think we're going to have to godfather backcasting practices, such as recognizing and rewarding zero-till practices that were done before a certain date, if we want to get any traction on additionality. Because this communications wall again is, you won't even recognize all the good stuff I've been doing for things, yet you're rewarding somebody else who's been a laggard in other parts of the country. That's not fair. To hell with you. You see that loud and clear. So we need to recognize some of this. Money matters. I think we also need to recognize whole farm credits rather than piecemeal credits. Every corporation wants to buy a lentil acre grown on indigenous land. That story is a whole bunch better. No, a credit is a credit, period. And I think having the value of those credits reported on a farm's balance sheet will reinforce the value of preservation practices. If you can see on your balance sheet, they're sitting in, it's just like a bin of canola. You got a bin of canola sitting on your balance sheet. It's not worth it. It's just sitting there. It doesn't become part of your income statement until you sell it. But when you can start seeing that there is value on your balance sheet, then all of a sudden there's a little more interest. And when there's a little more interest, then you're interested in communicating and hearing what I have to say. Money matters. Show me the money. I learned that perfection cannot be the enemy of good. A number of commitments and targets have been made for 2030. That's 6 production seasons away. Progress must start occurring, and perfection cannot be the enemy of good. And in our industry and on this topic, and from my observation, we've had lots of talk and we've had lots of white papers, but we have had near enough. Let's put the ball in the basket sessions. What are we going to do to advance it? I learned that technology is and will escalate progress, and farmers must have the latest and the best technology to remain competitive and to enhance sustainability. Sure, nobody's asking us to reduce the quality of what we're trying to do or the standards, but come on, we got to be competitive and we got to have the greatest technologies. Come on, we need the regulatory to support them. Technology also requires research. basic discovery research as well as applied research. And we need more of that for the major opportunities that are sitting in front of us. Technology is important and you need research. And that's where you folks in a lot of cases come in. I learned that viability matters. The greatest and fastest progress is likely to occur from viable, profitable farm enterprises that have the scale and the capacity and purchasing power to acquire and utilize technology so that they'll perform effectively. So yes, we have 165,000, but I'm more interested in 15 to 20 that are really handling the majority of things. How can we really help them? Regarding cover crops, the benefits of cover crops are not fully appreciated, especially in some regions. Again, regionality is important. Cover crops in Southwest Ontario make great sense. Cover crops in Eastern Alberta probably have adverse effects in a lot of cases. When it comes to biodiversity, rarely was this discussed or with farmers or in my interaction with farmers or the industry, despite it being a topic that is on the minds and tongues of most governments and NGOs. Nobody was talking about it. Food waste, water, and land use were also rarely discussed when it comes to sustainability. I learned that the biggest drivers of progress are probably the publicly traded companies and those companies that have gone to the investment community and have made pledges, and the SEC is going to hold them accountable for that. They're the ones that are most committed, and they're the ones that are going to drive that. Yes, they must work with governments. And today, senior leadership of management and senior leadership of government is not interacting nearly enough to be able to be where it needs to be in my mind. I learned what we all know in this room, and that is in our industry, incentives and carrots trumps taxes and sticks. Agriculture does not perform too well with sticks. They perform much better with encouraging words and demonstrating practices that work in local regions, etc. And finally, I learned the importance of respected leadership. Being a champion for sustainability and a trusted partner that is committed to advancing farmers and agriculture is needed and generally well accepted. I have kudos for the Dairy Farmers of Canada and how they've been doing some things with the dairy industry. And I would also say that RBC, when they were seen as supporting versus preaching, they were very well received. Mackay and Stackhouse, they were encouraged and applauded for doing things. So leadership is important in that regard. So folks, those are my observations. That was my bucket number one. Bucket number two. So what the hell do I think? My first comment is this. This topic is so complicated. It is so complex. It's global, it's national, it's regional, it's local, it's individual. It's crops, it's livestock, it's production, it's processing, it's branding, it's industry, it's governments, it's academics, it's NGOs, it's insets, it's offsets, it's incentives, it's sticks, it's traditional, it's new, it's wallet in the game players. It's outside influencers. It's evolving, and it is highly emotional. And the importance of communication that informs and resonates cannot be overstated. It's my first thought. My second thought is net zero agriculture probably isn't the correct goal. Sure, I can applaud Canada for wanting to be net zero. But when it comes to agriculture, I question whether it is possible. Net zero carbon is somewhat foolish. Agriculture is carbon. Food is carbon. And we need more food grown and supplied by countries like Canada that have a track record and a commitment to be as sustainable as possible. And even the green-focused EU isn't talking about net zero carbon in agriculture as much. And maybe Canada should have a hint on that. And while I don't think net zero carbon is possible in Canada. I think reducing and cutting emissions and enhancing sound soil, water, and air practices is possible. And that should be the primary focus of Canadian agriculture. And it should be focused strongly by governments, by industry, and by all stakeholders. Let's prioritize emission reduction. While carbon sequestration shouldn't be dismissed, I think the greatest advancements in Canadian agriculture are likely to come from emission reduction technologies and practices. It's questionable about the amount of additional carbon that Canadian soils, specifically prairie soils, and our grasslands can sequester. Yet we can do lots in these other areas. And I think our programs and our programming and incentives should focus on some of the other things like emission reductions, and get into some of these other things in a minute, and recognize some of the backcasting stuff that we've done, as well as what we could do going forward. And government and corporate programs are needed, and they need to work in harmony to be beneficial. And I think there's some good lessons that we can take from PepsiCo on how to do this. Another thought is, what does biodiversity in agriculture mean? And how does that align with feeding a hungry, food affordability sensitive world? I think there's lots of agreement on the importance and the pitfalls of monoculture cropping systems, or the importance of genetic banks and underseeding and dual seeding when areas that make sense. There's lots of support for stuff like that. But the importance of eliminating weeds and the importance of separating livestock species and doing things like that for disease prevention, that doesn't line up. So if biodiversity is important, explain to me, what does that mean for agriculture? And what do I really need to do to advance biodiversity? Explain it to me. Then I can get behind it. But right now I don't. All I'm hearing is, well, we got to be more biodiverse. We got to do this. Well, what does it really mean? Explain it. Another thought. Let the progress continue. Canadian agriculture respects the importance of sustainability. Sustainability is a subject that Canadian agriculture can be extremely proud of. And sure there is, and there always will be areas where improvement can be made. But failure to recognize the accomplishments of the past and the present, and the commitment we have to continually going forward, is both discrediting and demoralizing to the industry and the stakeholders. Considerable progress has been made and continues to be made. Examples include zero and minimum tillage, 4R management, nutrient management practices, rotational grazing, biodigesters, genetic improvements in crops and livestock, fuel consumption, soil consumption. The list goes on and on. For God's sakes, let's start celebrating some of these things. Another thought. Land use and water management policies are required, and they're likely unpleasant. Quality agricultural land is a limited asset, and it must be protected for agricultural use. And this means expropriation and zoning of agricultural land for non-agricultural purposes needs to be halted. It also means that lowlands and shelter belts and tree areas, etc., has got to be handled carefully, despite the desires of farmers with big equipment that want to get in, turn them out so they can keep going forward. And responsible water management policies and practices are required, and rural municipalities must step forward and start fulfilling their duties. And compensation is likely required, and communications is definitely required, and so is strong leadership. And this is not a pleasant topic, folks, but someday we're going to have to address it. Let's start getting on to that fairly soon. Another thought, adaptation versus mitigation. Changing weather patterns, disease increases, insect population increases, etc., probably means that few are really questioning whether climate change or climate viability is real and must be taken seriously. Yet to date, much of the discussion has been on climate mitigation. and yet lesser and likely more important focus needs to be on climate adaptation and resiliency. How can we better adapt and progress under these changing conditions? Research is needed, extension is needed, and communications is essential. Related to research and extension, we need more of it. We need more basic discovery research and applied research so that we can adapt, so that we can improve, and so that we can lead. Big moonshot discovery researcher projects are needed. The most significant advancements to a healthy planet are likely to occur from yet to be discovered breakthroughs: nitrogen fixing cereals, emission reducing livestock, drought resistant crops. These are just some of the major breakthroughs that are going to require research solutions. And Canada has delivered significant benefiting discovery research in the past. Look at what we've done with canola, with Marquis wheat, with poultry genetics, et cetera, et cetera. And we've been a leader in innovation in seeding equipment and zero tillage and banding fertilizer and nutrient management for our nutrient management, et cetera. With that in mind, Agriculture Canada research stations are universities' gifts. You guys, we need more money. You need to be properly funded. You need to be properly endorsed, and you need to be recognized for the good work you're doing. And we need more of that. And that means that we need to have more government funding, and we need more private funding. Investment funding needs to come from multinationals, venture capital, private placement, et cetera. And we're probably going to need some policy in order to do that. Research is important. Let's put the money in and be able to help it. This is an area that we can certainly do some things in. Two more thoughts: backcasting and payment for ecosystem services. Farmers and ranchers should be rewarded for best practices that keep carbon in the soil, as well as practices that put carbon in the soil and stopping emissions. Failure to recognize some of these things are going to initiate practices that adversely impact sustainability. We're going to see the continual rip up of grasslands because the profitability of growing canola is just a whole bunch better. We're going to see people come out of zero tillage for a couple of years so they can take advantage of the new programs. That's stupid, in my opinion. We need to have some of these things that you can backcast and say, hey, if this is important, then let's move forward and find ways to do that. And my final thought is this: we need to elevate Canada's involvement in international agencies. Like it or not, substantial influence on Canada's sustainability and policies and practices come from outside Canadian borders. World organizations are setting the policy and determining the standards, the reports, and the recommendations. And I think those world organizations would benefit greatly from more Canadian involvement. And I think Canadian agriculture would benefit from more Canadian involvement in those things. So I think Canada should increase the number of in-kind leadership secondments to international agencies. So those are my thoughts. I will now move into bucket number 3. What would I do? Because 2030 is just around the corner. Here are 5 suggestions. The first thing is, I would expand the business of farming and show me the money. What happens if the business of farming is expanded from production to production and preserving? Today, farmers are paid to produce. They're paid for the quantity and the quality of the products they produce, both, and we're good at it, both conventional and organic, and then crops, and then livestock. But farmers also take their stewardship responsibility seriously. Their land, their water, their commitment to livestock, etc. And they're making investments both in time and in dollars that further enhance this stewardship contribution. But rarely are farmers compensated for these important contributions. I think Canada has an opportunity to change this, and to do this in a positive, respected, business-like versus social handout manner. We need to put value in preserving. And I'm going to explain in a second an idea I have on how to do that. But just imagine, I think there's $50 an acre available for additional profitability if we do this. Key Jim tells me that there's $50 a cow or animal as well. That's a lot of money. That's worth getting after. And what happens when farmers make more money? They can't keep it. They spend it, right? What happens? The rural economy improves, right? What else happens? Morale improves. What else happens? More people are interested in it and attracted to it. The consumer starts to get more excited about it. When there's money in the game and things happen, everything improves in that regard. And I think if we had a program that not only recognized the quality of the product that we sell, develop and sell here in Canada, but also how we do it, I think that is a marketing differential advantage that we could move towards. So show me the money. So I would like to introduce what I am calling, the Canadian Sustainability Rewards Program. And this is a program that rewards and supports farmers for doing those stewardship things that go beyond production that are important to the country and the planet. What is the desired outcomes, before we get into it, what is the desired outcomes of this program? I think it needs to be a program that encourages and rewards best practices, continuous improvement, and meaningful progress towards advancing our sustainability targets. It needs to be a program that is market-driven, industry investor focused, not government and social handout program. It needs to be a program that would attract the maximum number of farmers and ranchers to get involved. It needs to be a program that farmers are proud to be involved in. No different than as they're driving by and they see that nice crop that they've just grown and they're proud of that, or the nice livestock that they have and they're proud. They need to be also as proud to say, and this is how I am doing that, and I'm being rewarded for that, and I feel good about that. I don't feel I'm taking from somebody else in that regard. It needs to be a program that is developed and designed by a combination of expertise and regional practicality. And it is one that starts with the basics and isn't afraid to be adjusted with experience and maturity. If we don't have it right, so be it, we will adjust it. Let's admit that right up front. Let's try something. And if it's done right, I think there's an opportunity. It could also be a program that would stimulate investment in Canada and Canadian agriculture. Now, let me explain what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say that this program must be simple and easy to participate in, easy to administer, and profitable enough that people want to participate and they can get some money for it. Producers, to help do that, producers first must be data ready so that they know what they can supply to be able to do this. The program must recognize regional differences, be fair and applicable to both crop and livestock, and meet international trade agreements. The program should work in harmony with corporate programs as well as government bonus incentives. And in my mind, there are 4 areas where farmers can get points. I'm calling them points right now. They may be a credit, they may be a token, and I'll get into that. But you get credits in 4 different areas. If you can show you've increased your carbon is this, and you've increased your carbon, you get points for that. How do we measure that? Well, we got to figure that part out, but you get points for it, right? Number 2, if you have shown that your emissions from fertilizer or wherever else it is, all your practices is this, and you have dropped it, you get points for it. But you also get points for nature things, biodiversity activities, whatever they are. If you can show that you're doing those, you would get points for it. If you would show that you were doing this for good water management, you can get points for that. You would also get points for payment for ecosystem services. So you could get points for backcasting. You've been zero tillaging for so many years. You've got this amount of carbon. You get points for that. Now look at The points are going to vary from things. I'm not getting into that. There's got to be a lot smarter people in putting this together. What I'm trying to say is that we need a points-based program that can capture those 4 different areas. Every farmer and rancher could participate in some for that. They get some points. They then get to put so then you get to put the value on that. Some of these points, the marketplace sets them. In other cases, we got to give them tokens so that you could say, this is what it could be worth. Let me give you an example of that. When the Canadian government sold the Canadian Wheat Board to G3, which was Bunge and the Saudi Arabians, they sold 50.1% of the shares. 49.9% of the shares got put into a trust, the Farmers Equity Trust. I am one of the trustees that oversees that. So for every ton of grain that you haul to G3, you get a trust unit. We as the trustees monitor, Tracy, you got this many trust units. The share, and this is where we have it with the database shows that. And once a year, we put a value on that. Today, the value is $5. Is it worth $5? It's not worth anything. It's only worth something when you actually sell it. But it's sitting over here. Know what I mean? This is an asset. So I'm saying your credits and your tokens that we can do have a value to it. And then you can sell those to the marketplace. And you say, well, who's going to buy them? Well, there's lots that are trying to buy and set up programs to do this. But let's use, for example, I'm going to make up Unilever. Unilever, big international companies trying to do all these different things, really don't have a big, huge investment in Canada. And they could look and say, well, we can take the credits because those are already approved. We could do, but we can't take these tokens. Well, maybe the Canadian government could say, but you know what? If you started to invest more in Canada and you started to hire and you started doing some of these other things, then maybe you could take your tokens and we will give you your credit so you can use that. I don't know whether this will work or not, folks. What I think the government needs to do is that they need to set the guidelines for this token and credit accumulation. That's one thing. They need to stand behind the value of the nature-based credit token solutions for biodiversity, water management, etc. No different than the public that I do as a trustee on the units, the things for the Wheat Board. And finally, they need to set up an incentive program for companies to come to Canada, to invest in Canada, to be able to do that so that they could be rewarded if they do take some of these things. If we can put money in the pockets of farmers for doing good things that we all agree to do that, and we can make this happen, I think we can move along things forward. And I think we need to make that a priority. Put some money in the pockets with a program like the Canadian Roundtable for Canadian Sustainability Rewards Program. Just an aside. I met with one of the discussion groups I met with was Cargill and the sustainability team of Cargill North America. And needless to say, their focus right now is to get as many insets as they can to do different things and then set up a program for their customers, etc. So they're out talking to farmers. So I said to them, is my program competition to you or support for you? And they said, probably both. And I look at it and put it into canola terms. They want to contract canola, they can go directly to the farmer and say, okay, we'll do this, and you can sign up and that's where you go. Or I can just grow my own canola, sit it in, and if I want to sell it, I can sell it to Cargill if I wish or not, right? So I think we could have something like this if we put our minds around what kind of a sustainability rewards program could we have? I think we need one. That's my first suggestion. My second suggestion and thought is we must prioritize communications. Communications must be taken to a whole new stratosphere. That's internal industry communications. That's communications with stakeholders or policymakers and stakeholders and influencers. And it's communications with the general public. Now, with the internal, with the agricultural audience, We need to have communications that informs, but also motivates. Not just, they got to be behind this. It needs to be communications that is regionalized, is sectoralized, is promotes practices that work. You do this in this area in Alberta, it works real good. It doesn't work too good in Prince Edward Island. Stuff that works and not. Let's have communications that's that kind of. For policymaker and influencer communication, we need to have communications that informs, but I think we also have to challenge them. We also have communication. Say, come on, stop being a hurdle standing in the way. Come on, work with us. We don't have it all worked out. We need you to work together. We want to work together with that. We need communications like that. And then the general public needs to be set up to be able to be informed. And there's organizations. There's the Center for Food Integrity can take a responsibility for doing something. We can share out, but we must take communications to a whole new stratosphere. And I think we need to have a plan that is a coordinated plan on how we're doing that, and we need to properly fund it. And I think we're going to need $10 million to get going on this type of thing in order to do that. So if that's what it is, if this is what the plan is, then to get after it. My third priority is let's prioritize research and extension. Canada's research funding for sustainability and moonshot projects, both public and private, needs a major boost. And we also need the extension services required to transfer that knowledge. And to do that, we need to encourage and fund more research. That's government research and that's private research. And our universities, your organizations, gifts, Vineland, they need more funding in that regard. And in Canada, or in the US, we need extension too. In the US, we got land grant universities that got responsibility for extension. The provinces were in charge of that. We basically across the country abdicated that. So it's research and extension, I think, that is needed to be able to advance this. And the communication, how we do that is important. So I think we need to look at that. Sure, it's going to take money. Maybe we're going to have to adjust some additional programs. So let's look at some of this, but come on, this is what's needed. Let's get behind it and get doing it. My fourth suggestion is international secondments. Canada, in alignment with the provinces and the industry, needs to increase its in-kind international secondments to international agencies, thereby ensuring that Canada has a stronger voice in policy creation as well as in measurements and in reporting standards. My fifth one is probably the most important one in my mind. And that is we need leadership and a structure that's going to allow us to put the ball in the basket. To advance Canada's sustainability and agricultural, its sustainability action is required, and it's action built on responsibility and accountability. There's lots of discussion, there's lots of small group interaction and siloed initiative, but there is no respected organization, agency, body that has responsibility and accountability for advancing progress. And such a body, I think, is badly needed. The mandate of the body, in my mind, should be to advance Canadian agriculture's and the food industry, and specifically do 4 things. One is streamline and coordinate Canada's sustainability efforts of government ministries, industry, and farmer and ranchers. Streamline. Number 2, oversee the development of this rewards program. Number 3, take responsibility for coordinating and securing the funding for the communication. And number 4, be a champion for Canadian agriculture and sustainability advancement within the industry and beyond the industry. Now, what's the structure of the body I would suggest? I think it needs to be a respected body with a strong connection to the PMO's office. And it is a body that is directed by an arm's length board composed of 9 to 11 respected industry leaders spanning the ecosystem of producers, industry, and governments. Why do I say the PMO's office? Because the opportunities and the challenges span beyond the ministry They encompass agriculture, they encompass environment, they encompass global affairs and small business and rural development and ocean and fisheries, and that's too many, and it needs to work to the top. This government in Canada has two significant priorities, it seems. One's climate, the other one is Indigenous. This fits into climate and stuff like that, so it should report into the PMO's office. I think it needs to be an arm's length, directed by an arm's length body, because there is no organization that I can see of today that has got the mandate to be able to bring everything together, the respect. If there is, it's Farm Credit, but Farm Credit's mandate has to change in order to do, and if that's the case, then so be it. Then we can do with that. And I've had a good discussion with Farm Credit on this whole thing. It needs to be led by a chair that is respected by the PMO's office, as well as selected by that board of directors. I think it needs to have management that is a senior person, maybe a deputy minister of some sort, that has good connections with all the others that can report into the PMO's office. But I also think they need to have a senior person that is has responsibility for the agri-food industry champion in that regard. I think the 9 to 11 directors should be respected individuals that come across from the various sectors that we're doing in, but also a few from the outside that have expertise in this other area that improve the competencies and what can be done. And yes, of course, we're going to have to follow the diversity and equality inclusion standards, and that only makes sense, and that's what we have to do. And I think there's some good people to be done. That could do that. Yes, they would be paid an honorarium, but it needs to be so damn small that nobody would want it. And that's the kind of people you need to have around the table that are champion and willing to stand up and voice their opinions if that's required, because it's in the betterment of the industry that needs to be done. I think they need an office, 2 offices, probably one in Ottawa and one in the West. And as far as operations is concerned, I don't think the administration has to cost a whole bunch in order to do that. I'm sure we can find the funding for that, and probably environment and agriculture got the most to do, but some of the others could be able to do that. This doesn't have to cost a whole bunch. The program funding, that if you want a bonus for some of the rewards program, that's a different scenario, but we can look at that. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's my thoughts. I'm saying that, hey, this is an important topic that I don't think we have taken enough time and seriously. I think this isn't a topic we can actually win. This is an important thing that agriculture can do some good things in. There is money in preserving as well as producing. There's an opportunity to elevate our whole industry if we do some things in that regard. My 5 suggestions are: we need to show me the money. We need to improve communications. We need to prioritize research and development. We need to be internationally connected and at those tables so we can do that. And we need a body that can put the ball in the basket that is committed to do that. Those are my thoughts. Daryl, that's it.
That's it. That's a lot of information. Thank you so much for sharing that. A lot to digest there. A recurring theme for me has been simple, easy, profitable, right? There's so many moving parts now, but if we come back to that theme, I think we can start the way through it. On behalf of Kate and the entire team here at Upper Days, thank you so much. Appreciate it.